Hello, love. I'm Ashley Miley, and this is the Sacred Intimacy Temple, a podcast exploring love, sex, and relationships as a sacred spiritual path. Each episode is a remembrance of sacred intimacy, first with yourself, and then with Source, your beloved, family, and community. Come home to the temple within. Let's begin. Hello, beloved. Welcome back to the Sacred Intimacy Temple podcast and to our final episode of the Coming Home to Intimacy series. You have made it. So have I. We've all made it. I'm recognizing now that this was very ambitious. I'm sure for anyone who knows me well, this is not surprising by any means. I'm not surprised by this, but it was ambitious. But I'm really glad that we're here. And I really just want to, first and foremost, take a moment to express my deepest gratitude for your presence throughout this series. For you making yourself available to this work, to these ideas, to this medicine. And I really just want to celebrate you for showing up. Because more times than not, that's half the battle, is just showing up for it. And actually, I think that's a great, it is a great tie-in to today's topic. Today, I'm really leading with the idea of we've talked about all these different things. We've talked about sacred intimacy and why we're disconnected from it, what it even means, what the path is. We've talked about connecting back to pleasure. We've talked about inner sacred union. We've talked about coming back to the body. And it's here's all these things. And all of that combines in this way that, I think for lack of a better term, we come back to ourselves fully. We are connected to our wholeness. We are connected to our truth. And then we step into a relationship of any kind. And that's where the real work begins. That doesn't sound very sexy or fun. It's just not. And I slightly frame this a little bit more right now in my mind around partnership. But I do think that this is somewhat applicable to all relationships. But there is something to be said about, I think many of us, when we think about partnership, we think that we just meet this person and they're this perfect person and we all want the same thing. We have the same values and blah. And it's oh, now we're in this perfect thing and it's great. Honestly, no. Especially given where we are as a society today. Part of the path that I've been talking about and some of the different aspects I've been talking about is just first and foremost, we're so disconnected from each other, but also ourselves that it's we've just got to kind of come back here first. And then it's we can do so much profound work on our own. And I think even if you talk about spirituality has very well outlined this whole kind of inner or individual solo spiritual evolution journey. And then for most of us, we could be these great meditators. We could do all kinds of breath work. We could do all the whatever with plant medicine and blah, 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 blah. And then we come into a relationship and it's poof, whatever sense of wisdom, consciousness, etc. that we have cultivated as a solo individual, it all goes out the window. And we're just these wounded inner children running around screaming and not playing very nice with each other. And I'm kind of trying to make light of just also how painful is that? And it's this wild phenomenon in a way, but it's also we all kind of are there where it's I'm able to meditate for 4 hours straight and I've levitated to the 12th dimension and I am this whatever. And then I come into my relationship and poof, I'm a 4-year-old. And that is because, like, what you learn on this solo journey, and even part of the reason I speak a lot to the idea of like, you come into relationship with yourself, because relationship skills are different than even like what it takes to tend to yourself. But when you're in relationship to yourself, you start to develop some of those relational skills. So if you think about, for example, you're in a relationship with yourself, and let's just make it very simple. You are relating to your inner child. Your inner child is feeling misunderstood or not heard or not seen. You're attuning to that part of yourself. You're bringing presence. You are being with that part. You are trying to not fix it. And you hold space for that part to move through what it needs. You give it reassurance. And at some point, like, that part is okay. You've digested that. Everything that you needed in that, listening, attunement, presence, even just your ability to stay in your body and regulate it. You can take, those are relational skills. Bring that into a moment with someone else. What I think can make it a bit more challenging, and this is where our like relational tools get to kind of get turned up and up level, if you will, for lack of a better term, is that we have someone else's a whole other different body. So when we're in a relational moment with someone else, it's two bodies, two inner children, all the things. It's multiple. It's a field that we then create. It's a little bit different when we're just talking about ourselves because it's all kind of in the same field, even if it's like, hey, like to be able to be a good partner, to be able to be a great parent, to be able to be a wonderful friend, being able to listen and attune is a helpful skill to have. We can practice that within ourselves, but to be able to stay in that listening when we can feel someone else's body pulling at us in a certain way because of their wounding and our wounding and whatever, is more challenging. And so we kind of work with ourselves to build some of those relational skills in some ways, but then they get to be like the rubber really meets the road when we come into a relational moment. And more of our stuff, especially if we haven't digested enough of it, is going to come up in relationship because it developed in relationship. And like that material wants to be resolved. And so it's going to mean that when we come into a relational moment, it's going to be a bit more challenging because we have more stuff coming up. We have the present moment of what's happening, but we also have all this old stuff coming up. There's parts of us that are trying to like resolve something from the past by trying to enact something from this person or trying to get something from this person or whatever the dynamic might be. And so in that way, like relationship is not just this static thing that like once you find the perfect person, it's there. It in itself is a practice. It in itself, if you allow it, can evolve you spiritually, can evolve you as a human being. And you can only really step into that and like initiate yourself in that way and receive that kind of invitation, I think, from just the practice of being in relationship to yourself and like coming back into relationship with your body and being attuned to your body and knowing how to work with your body. Because again, the intimacy you experience with someone else is really a phenomenon within your body. And when you're in relationship with yourself, you're developing, your relational skills, you're understanding how to be in relationship in some ways. When you're, reclaiming your pleasure and all that, you're understanding that part of yourself. And then you come into a relational moment, into a relational field, and everything gets amplified. And so relationship then is really a practice. And again, even if we just think about the idea that, and I'm not sure that many people think about this, but relationships, just like we as human beings, like I as a solo individual, nature goes through seasons. I as a solo individual go through my own seasons. Sometimes they align with the seasons happening externally, sometimes they don't, which means like I'm not always showing up in the same way. My focus isn't always the same. And we experience the same thing in relationship. And we can understand that in a way where it's like two individuals come together, they're going through their own seasons. But really, like when we think about I would say like healthier relating, even sacred relating, there's this understanding and this choice to make in a way that you actually want to come into relationship with some degree of being intact with your wholeness, with really being connected to your own sovereignty, to your own wholeness, to your own self. And when you walk into a relational field, you walk into a relationship container from that place, and both parties are doing that, you start to really understand that one, you're never going to drop yourself. It's not like all of a sudden you don't exist as like a solo entity. That's not true. And I think that's where some of the unhealthy relating happens, where it's like we become like we lose ourselves so much in the other person that we forget that we're like an individual. And of course, we want to have moments of that sort of like one emergence, but to always be existing in that is not great. We also, on the other side of that, can be so attached and so like, I am a sovereign, I am my own person, that like we just have two people who are like existing in the same plane, but they're not actually like allowing themselves to come inward to each other. And so there has to be this choice and this awareness. Again, I've said this before, but relationship is this natural impulse of coming in and coming out. It's this dance. We're coming in and connecting, we're coming out and we're coming back to this fullness. And in that, we recognize that relationship is the third entity, as I like to call it. It is something that we're co-creating, and it's co-created, one, from the choice of two sovereign beings, two whole people, really wanting to offer themselves, wanting to co-create something, wanting to connect, wanting to experience together. And in the notion that there's kind of this dance of in and out, the third entity also sort of represents the willingness to like lean in, but also recognizing that even when we lean out and we're in a more spacious place of leaning out, um, we're still in connection. We're still in relationship. It just looks a little different in that moment. I really like to think about this almost like as a Venn diagram. So, you have the two circles on their own, and that sort of represents the two sort of whole solo sovereign individuals. And like you can have a Venn diagram where like there's only like a little sliver of overlap. And that sliver of overlap, the overlap itself is the relationship, is the third entity. And when we recognize again that we're coming in and out, that means the overlap gets to grow and shrink in a way. So in the moments that we're leaning into relationship, that overlap is going to be bigger. There's also, again, moments where we sort of have that emergence of oneness, where like basically the two circles kind of eclipse each other and they become this overlap. But we don't always want to exist in that. We want, again, to be able to pull away and to have our own space and to like be back in our own body, be in our own experience, be with our own desires, moving towards our own things. Even if, again, like we're in a relationship or in a long-term relationship, we're sharing that with someone, we're co-creating, there's still like a piece of us that's in that is different than the relationship. And so, in those moments that we're sort of leaning away, that natural leaning away, we're taking some space, we're coming back, we can still have overlap. It's just the overlap in this Venn diagram example is very small. But again, it represents that the relationship is still there. The thread of connection is still there, even when we're a bit more leaning out. And I also like to think about this like leaning out and leaning in, this Venn diagram, the overlap grows, the overlap shrinks, is also representative of the idea that our awareness, or how much we're bringing, like how much of our awareness we're putting into ourselves and then putting into the relationship into another person, gets to shift. Because sometimes like we really need our presence and our awareness to be with ourselves. And it doesn't mean that we're not connected to the other person, we're not thinking about them, but maybe it's only like 10% of ourselves right now is in the relationship. And, the 90 other percent is like really with us. There's other times where it's like, it's 50-50, maybe it's 60-40, 70-30, whatever. And it's representative of the idea that even when we're in relationship, even when we're leaning in and tuning in and you know, co-creating, being with another person, we are still connected to ourselves. We're still aware of ourselves. We're still tracking ourselves because our body, what we're experiencing, keeping our awareness there helps us understand, like, oh, like what's going on in my field? What are maybe, for example, some of my preferences that are coming up? And it also, like in the way of leaning into someone else, we can be curious about someone else's experience. And from all that data, all that information in the sort of relationship container, this third entity, we really get to ask, like, because the point of relationship is connection, is like a deepening of what we've experienced on our own. And so, for example, if we, maybe just for simplicity, like we want to experience more pleasure in sex, when we're tuned into our own self, we might be like, this is the way that I want to experience that, or like, this is what I need. And I think we need to be very strong advocates for what we need and desire in sex. And sometimes when we tune in to something a little bit greater, we kind of zoom out a little bit just from our own sense, but we're also taking in someone else's desires and their needs. There becomes the third entity, the relationship sort of reveals the opportunity, reveals the solution. Maybe, for example, I might want to explore, like, I want to enhance pleasure through having like eye gazing as part of the experience. And that's my preference. That's my thing. I'm like, that's what I want. That's what would give me more, pleasure in this experience. And then, um, in the notion of like a partner, maybe they're like, actually, like, I need more touch. And so when we kind of bring that information, because again, we're both attuned to ourselves, we're attuned to what we desire, what we need, we're willing to share that. Sharing that co-creates the third entity of relationship, the container. When we let that simmer for a moment, it's like, what reveals itself from there? What would be the moment? What could we co-create together in this moment that would allow both of us to be men? And just to illustrate this a bit more, maybe simplistically, it's like maybe I'm sitting here and I'm like, I want to eye gaze with you for 2 hours. And maybe when we kind of take both pieces of desires and needs and we attune to that, it's like maybe we only eye gaze for like an hour. you know, it can be something like that where it's like that's like above and beyond my own preference, but it's in service to the understanding of like, what are we co-creating together? And maybe, for example, it's actually this experience where we're eye gazing and we're also like in that, like we're touching each other's faces or we're touching like our arms or something like that. And we're kind of creating that together. And so again, like when we're willing to like lean in, listen to someone else, attune to someone else, willing to kind of like go find the middle path, but together and through the co-creation together, that is where connection is enhanced, intimacy is enhanced. And it's like, it's a unique expression of our relationship is a unique expression and interweaving of you and I. And that's how like no relationship looks the same. And I think I say that and it sounds kind of obvious, but I don't think we really recognize the uniqueness, like the unique constellation that is for two people to come together and to choose to like lean in. And when they lean in, what that means moment to moment of like the information they offer, the things they ask for, the desires they have, and how that creates these very unique moments when we do connect. And like how, when we come away, like as we're integrating that, what comes through. And again, this dance of in and out. And so it becomes this practice, becomes a practice of staying connected to ourselves, tending to ourselves, being in a relationship to ourselves, and knowing when we need to lean back and do that, and then knowing when to lean in. It's a practice to be able to attune to something beyond my own desires, my own needs. And it's not in a way of self-abandonment or self-sacrificing or fawning or anything like that. It's just a recognition of like, I'm choosing to be in this relationship, in this container. And in this moment, I'm choosing to lean in more than I'm like maybe leaning away, for example. The moment asks me to lean in. So when I lean in, if I really want to experience the magic, the power, the co-creation, the beauty of this relationship, that means I have to actually be willing to let the other person come with me, that I listen to them, that I attune, I even go beyond that, which is kind of why I use the idea of like this third entity. It's kind of like having a third person almost in a way. And like when this information merges, when our two fields merge as and creates this like new field, what does that field reveal? And to be in that, to resolve conflict in that, to deepen an intimacy and all that is a skill. It is a practice. And I think that our romantic relationships specifically often can be more challenging to do that in because of the ways that our unresolved childhood stuff like is more triggered and more deeply triggered often in romantic relationships than maybe in other relationships. It doesn't mean that it doesn't show up, which is why this is applicable to all relationships. But there's kind of a unique sharpening of the sword, if you will, that happens in romantic relationships for a lot of us. And so in that, I think it I think it's very revolutionary in a way to think about coming into a relationship as a whole person. Like you really are like, you open up and you lean in this way of like, I don't have to meet myself all the time. I don't have to be the only one to meet my needs. I'm willing to actually like invite this person to know me in that way and to receive from them. But to still know, like in this like holding of yourself, it's like in the moments that they can't do that, the moments they don't want to, but it's still like a good relationship and I'm still being relatively met and, all that. If that's kind of like a given, I'm okay. So I am in relationship to myself. I've got myself. I know how to be with myself and to meet myself. And what a gift that is. It's revolutionary to think like, what happens when we're willing to like let go of our stuff and be in the potent creative space of the third entity of the relationship and to be curious about what can we experience together? What can we co-create together? What can we alchemize together? And what in this container with me and this person, what is possible here that in no other constellation is exactly the same anywhere else? And it's like, I want to be in the specialness, this magicness of that. And what comes on the other side of that? What's possible on the other side of that? When I think about the idea of the new earth, of where this world is going, of where it even needs to go and where it feels called, like the thread I always hear is around intimacy. It's around relationship. It's around coming back to this innate knowing, this innate capacity to relate and to be connected to other people. And there's a way that, like, stepping into that and challenging yourself and recognizing the practice of relationship and being willing to develop the skills, being willing to lean in, being willing to make mistakes, to repair, to just be in the whole sauce of that. That is service to the earth because eventually you have enough people doing that. And in your own practice of relationship, you remember like whatever sort of wisdom you have of relating comes through. And how that shows up in you that you give to your partner and how that shows up in your relationship and how that relationship might interact with the world is service, is a gift, is medicine. And it's where I think to see people in relationships that understand this, that are practicing this, to be a witness to that is healing within itself. It imprints something and it's an invitation to do that as well. When enough people do that, that's how we return to sort of this like collective conscious innate knowing of what relating is. And we start with like this romantic relationship where it often can be most challenging in some ways. And when we're practiced, we then start bringing it elsewhere. And it's even kind of like if you were to create a family from that kind of partnership, your kids are witnessing that. You have the good skills to teach them that you pass along to them. What kind of world does that create? What becomes possible? And to recognize, to step into that, to initiate yourself into that, to be of service to that idea, like is service to the world. Being in partnership in that way is service to yourself, to your partner, to your family, to your community, to the world. And it all calls us back to, I think, really just the collective thread of unconditional love and of full aliveness. And that, there's nothing more sacred than that. And this kind of path is not meant for everyone. And that's okay. It's a really unique calling. But if you feel called to it, I invite you to really allow yourself to explore that. Allow yourself to lean into that. Because there's a reason for that. There's something very unique that you carry, that the constellation of whatever relationships you exist in carry, that is needed. And again, it all brings us back to, I think, some of the foundational things we're all desiring. This aliveness and this love and a sense of connection, and all of that really just being intimacy itself. And so, in the spectrum of my body of work, this season is a very deep foundational laying of that inner relationship and the practice of that and the deepening and the sharpening of that. But eventually it grows to build this kind of initiation, working with couples who want to practice and be in this way and helping them find their unique way of doing that. Because again, it's also not like a formula. Every relationship is a unique constellation. And there has to be a learned capacity to hear the impulse and to trust and to follow that. And to do that in the relational field, which is very unique and very different than just in yourself. Or even, in some ways, like in a relationship with you and some sort of greater entity of some sort. And so I really just want to invite you to think like, even just the idea of partnership being a practice. It's not a fixed thing. It's not a one and done in a way. It is a practice. It is a constant showing up. It is a constant choosing to lean in, to attune, to love, to go beyond yourself, but with anchoring in yourself. Feel into, if you were to lean into that choice, like what would become possible? What would become available to you? What would you experience that's different than maybe what you've experienced thus far? And from that place, what medicine would you have to offer the world? And how would the world change in receiving that? And when you can recognize that partnership in that way has a very unique, I'm not sure technology is the right word, but for lack of a better term right now, technology. When you recognize it has that kind of technology, like that is what I mean when I say that partnership is the next edge of human evolution and spiritual evolution. It will literally change the world. Not change the world in this way of like completely creating something new, but just like the deep restoration of restoring innate truth, ancient truth. And I'd say currently in society as it stands, that seems pretty innovative and revolutionary in some ways. So, yes. And so with that, we come to the end of this series. And as we've walked through this series, the invitation has been to really come home to intimacy, to remember the love that you have always known is possible. And I want you to take a moment to just reflect on like, what have you connected to or reconnected to that has really been this impulse that has always existed within you, but is really amplified in this moment, in the span of this series, etc. And whatever that is for you, I just want you to hold that. You don't need to figure out what to do with it or anything like that, just holding that. And maybe in just holding it, realizing that your naming of it, your claiming of it innately will begin to reveal your path to deeper intimacy. And it won't just come to you straight away and be this clear thing. It will be one small step after another small step, a whisper after another, a small impulse into another small impulse. And in this moment, if it feels true for you, I invite you to really make a commitment to enter into that path. I want to thank you again for joining me through this whole series. I'm looking forward to many other things we will explore as this podcast continues to grow. And I want to leave you with just the reminder that this community, this temple, this work really does grow through word of mouth. And so whatever has inspired you in this series, whatever has been stirred up in you, I invite you to share that with someone, to share an episode with someone, and to just invite them to be part of this. We all get to come back to intimacy, and we all get to find our own unique path and way with it. We get to do that not in silos, not on our own, but together in community. And sharing this work, sharing this podcast, that is how this temple grows. From my heart to yours, I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for walking the path with me today. If you're feeling called to go deeper, everything you need is at thesacredintimacytemple.com. Join the community there to stay connected and be the first to know about new episodes, offerings, and what's coming up inside the temple next. And if this episode moves something within you, share it with a friend who's ready. I'll see you in the next episode. Come home to the temple within.